Well, hello, everyone. Oh my goodness, Lauren, what an amazing session. That was such an amazing kickoff, such an amazing session. But before we get into some questions and thoughts, I want you to introduce yourself. We'd love to hear who Lauren is.
Yeah, no, agreed. Great to be here with everyone. My name is Lauren DiNincenzo. I'm an associate professor of organizational behavior and provost solutions fellow at Drexel LeBeau College of Business. I teach classes in organizational behavior and so excited to talk about what we just heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Angelita Howard. I serve as the Assistant Dean for Online Education and Expanded Programs at Morehouse School of Medicine, also an assistant professor in the Medical Education Department. So I'm excited. Lauren, I want to kick off with, because from where I am, Morehouse School of Medicine, we talk about health equity and really about what equitable meaning is and how to be equitable. And so one of the things that Rebecca said, she talked about this notion of equitable tests. And of course, things were just rolling through my blood and my brain about, oh my goodness, did we just hear that? And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about, what is equitable testing? Is there really a notion? What did you think about that? How were your feelings?
Yeah, goodness, I think, equitable testing is one of those things that I think we all struggle with, and hopefully we're all thinking about. Going to one of the comments that Ben made too, is that faculty are not paid to write better tests, right? So we have to find the motivation somewhere to make this a focus of what it is that we're doing. And I think there was a really great comment about we have to be reflective on what's happening and not just write tests, hand them out and move on, but we have to be looking at, is this being received by everyone in my classroom in the same way? Are there systematic differences that I'm seeing in the responses to my exam where I need to make some adjustments or some changes because what we think might be resonating well with our students, we've actually maybe been putting up some roadblocks or challenges. And I think we really need to be reflective on that. Curious what you have to think about that same question.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree 100%. Danny mentioned something around care. And I remember I can't remember, it was a couple of years ago, and I remember a question around the ethic of care, and it was such an odd question, but even it brought back memories today when Danny mentioned about care, and we absolutely have to consider who our audience is, who our demographic target, who are we targeting in this course or in these classes or in this program. So it goes back to program outcomes. It goes back to, how do we map and then making sure that we change. But you mentioned something very interesting, that faculty are not paid to write tests. But if faculty are the one who are teaching and the one who give the assessment, then what is their role? What is their actual role in this assessment or test strategy to make sure that it aligns properly? Or should we really be looking at hiring strict curriculum managers or curriculum directors who then look at the information and really they are the ones that write out the test?
That's a great point. And one of the comments that was made during the discussion was around goals. Mm-hmm. Goals define the assessments. I think we need to think about what are our goals as instructors and what are the students looking to get from this, right? In a lot of my classes, I say, no one's going to come up to you and say, can you define motivation for me? They're going to say, hey, we don't have motivated employees. What can we do? Right? So what are our students going to need to do with the material that you're sharing with them? And I think, can we make assessments that align with what our students are going to need after they leave the classroom, once they get into the workplace, once they're interacting with others? How can they apply that information and how can they then retain it in a way that's going to be meaningful? I think one of the things that Danny mentioned too about being more humanistic and creating people in support of greater citizenship. I need to think about that too. It's not just performance in the classroom, but what is it beyond that?
Yeah, every time that we meet with faculty, especially for our online, and I want to delve into that because I know that we didn't really talk or we didn't hear a lot about that, but I want to dig into that. But every time we meet with faculty who are building classes for online programs, that's one of the things that we tell them, that you must teach this so that when students leave here, they're not looking at trying to figure out textbook answers. And no shade on anybody who writes textbooks. Textbooks are phenomenal. We absolutely need them. But for the people who are leaving, they're normally leaving school to get a job. And so if we're not teaching those skills, if we're not teaching what's happening on the outside, that's why I do appreciate practitioner teacher model, practitioner scholar model, so that people can really understand what is happening in the industry, what are the industry standards. And so we're basing our curricula, we're basing our testing so that students, when they leave our programs, they are prepared for the workplace. I remember Ben said tests that don't tap into what's being taught. So we got to make sure that these tests are tapping into what's being taught, and what's being taught should be aligned with what's happening, applied, if you will, so that people, when they leave, they will tie it back and say, hey, oh, this was good, this was helpful, I learned this.
Yeah, absolutely. Angelita, I'm curious too about your focus on online learning. Because a lot of us are face-to-face instructors, and certainly with COVID, we've seen more of a push to online learning, and that's here to stay, right? That's not going. We're going to see a whole lot more of that. Do you see challenges or any differences in the online learning environments?
Yeah, so great question, great thought. Online learning has certainly taken a shape over the last 15, 20 years. And but more prevalent as more schools are adapting to online learning. And so and it'll certainly be different, because when you have 100 students or 50 versus 25 students, the assessments look different. So where I would say, I would try to encourage faculty to build more practical projects as their assessments, or certainly essays or PowerPoints. Well, if you have 100 people in your class, 150, you can't give reasonable feedback on 100 PowerPoint. It'll be very difficult. So then you have to do more multiple choice, true, false, those type of exam questions, which many of us frown up, because it's like we're really trying to make sure you have that knowledge, which again goes back to those standardized testing that were talked about. When you have those standardized testing, look, I was when I first started teaching, I was teaching in middle school. It took me 2 times before I passed the praxis. I was deathly afraid. My grades were great. It was that I didn't understand the material. I just didn't test well. And so with online learning, I think it really gives an opportunity to assess students differently, so that you can make sure, or try to decrease the number of ways for people to cheat, or to just get through the material, and so they actually apply the knowledge to what's being learned. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, one of the things that really stood out for me was something that Rebecca had mentioned, that assessment is really like a mirror.
Yeah.
That we should be looking at it and using it as a way to see where people need support and help, just as much as what do they know. And I think this gets to part of the anxiety of test taking. If there are different ways that we can gain or gauge that assessment, or the consumption of learning, what students are retaining, what's meaningful for them, and we can use it to then be more helpful as we move forward, rather than just saying, hey, you got this wrong. Okay, you got this wrong. Why? What can we do? How can we review this information? I think the online learning environment, right, there's lots of opportunities to be more reflective in feedback, and give that immediate feedback too. I'll even reflect on my daughter, who was in virtual learning over the past year. And one of the challenges was she'd take an exam and then she wouldn't get that feedback right away. So if she's not doing well, that problem's going to continue. And the more we can be on top of feedback,
Yeah.
and so maybe that can help to reduce some of the anxiety of learning, because you're not going to perpetuate those same incorrect answers.
And so that goes back to how we design and set up the online classes, because which means you got to have staff or people looking in to make sure that prior to if an assignment is due on Wednesday, they need to receive feedback prior to the following Wednesday, or really that Sunday or Monday, so that they can shape their assignments going ahead. If you're not getting the response and the feedback in a timely manner, then how do we as students, how do they take what they should have learned and apply it to their new assignments? And oftentimes, especially in this fast-paced environment, that is not happening. And so we've got to make sure, again, that we have someone, if there be teaching assistants. A lot of institutions don't have teaching assistants. Some do, some don't, but those that don't, it is making sure that they have the time, because I know faculty, I hear you all talking to me. I hear you saying, but we have committees. We are on 5 committees. Where is the time? And so that's why, we have to step back and really evaluate the approach before we even start teaching, right? Before we even start designing the course. What is the method? Because you've got to spend that upfront time. If anything is going to be excellent, you've got to spend that upfront time making sure that it is built in such a way that you can give the feedback. Even, and Lauren, you can, how would you as faculty use other maybe students to help with those larger classes? Smaller classes are obviously a little bit easier to handle, but in larger classes, how do you get around not using multiple choice tests?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I'm fortunate enough, I teach in smaller base classes, but the larger auditorium, where you have 100+ students, and you want to give that quick feedback, you're capitated by time, and you don't have the time to read in depth 100 essays and give feedback in a week, because like you said, we all have other things to do. How do you do that in a meaningful way? So maybe it means making, fewer shorter assessments, or changing the way that you're giving those assessments. One of the things that I found really, really helpful for me is, to talk to students, right? I say, how do you know in organizations what people are struggling with, what they're motivated with? And the answer is talk to people. Yeah. And talk to students, see how things are going for them. What are the challenges that they face? Use that feedback. And normally we see students on the very high end, the ones who are doing really well giving the feedback, and the ones who perhaps perform a little bit poorly, they're always giving feedback. Just like if you get an assessment to take on your own, like you shopped at a store, how did we do, right? You're more likely to take it if you had a great experience or a horrible experience. And so we can get those experiences on the end. But that range of folks, which is probably 80% of our students, we're not hearing from. Yeah. And we really need to listen to what they have to say and hear what works for them.
Yeah, I also, and again, these are things that I think as we continue to build, but I also think that group assignments, especially with the larger class group assignments. And again, I hear you all talking about group dynamics. Well, sometimes we have to teach people how to work in groups. You don't work in silo. You do not. So there are certain projects that you work in silo as a part of the group. But anytime, and I'm not a baker, but anytime I baked a cake or a pie, I couldn't just do it with vanilla extract. I couldn't just do it with having an oven. I had to have some eggs. I had to have, some flour. I had to have some sugar, some butter. So right. Even though the elements worked individually, they had to work collectively to bake that cake or the pie. And so we've got to also teach that, because students will say, well, I don't like working in groups, or I'm shy, or this, that, and the other. But you don't, anytime you are progressing toward anything, Amazon, Yahoo or Gmail or Google, any of these tech companies, Course Hero, none of us work in silos to the point because we wouldn't have the products. Course Hero would not have the product that it has today, where we have thousands of faculty, thousands of staff, faculty watching today if they didn't work in a group. And so I think there are opportunities for larger classrooms to have group activities where they have individual parts, but they learn teamwork, they learn responsibility, they learn how to work together, and then they're assessed based on how well they work together, or how well they put their project out together.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You can lower the number of students to assess by putting them into groups, but you also have to then assess them as a whole. And we've talked about this before, the challenges of group assignments. And in the beginning of the semester, when you say we're going to have a group project, you hear moans and groans. And we don't want our students to have a negative experience when it comes to group projects. And unfortunately, a lot of them do. They go into it with a negative attitude because chances are they've worked with others who were social loafers, free riders, and weren't really pulling their weight. So we have to come up with strategies to make that experience better, right? We tie emotions to our experiences, and we want them to remember this positively. Some of the strategies I've used, is setting up a team charter with teams. Yep. Hey, what are the expectations? How do we contact everyone? Are we going to use a group me? Are we using something else to get in touch? What are the rules of engagement? What if someone doesn't pull their weight? What are we going to do? I've had group projects where I've allowed students to fire some of their students, and they go as a free agent, and they have to be picked up by another team, right? This works actually in simulation-based project where we had group term-long assignments. The other thing that works at the end, you can have students rate each other on how they did, but most of the time, I don't know about everyone here, everyone else grade assessments, and then they'll come privately tell me that people weren't pulling their weight. And so I've actually, instead of using a 1 to 100 rubric scale, I've said, hey, your team just got $1,000 for what it is that you've accomplished. How are you going to divide up the money? And for some reason, they're more likely to divide up that money more, and it aligns better with work effort than just points, right? So we have to be creative in terms of how we do this.
Oh, I love it. So we are in our last 2 minutes. In our last 2 minutes, Lauren, I want you to take 30 seconds and tell the faculty out there, give them just a quick encouragement about test taking and assessment.
I think that I'm going to piggyback on what Danny said. We need to be focused more on the human side and less on the administrative side, right? We've all got things that are pulling us in so many different directions, and we have to remember what we're here for. What's the bigger picture? Why did we get into teaching? Why do we work with students, right? And if we can dig deep and understand the meaning and value of what we do, I think that's going to open up some time for us to create better assessments, to think about this more. So it's valuing the human side versus always thinking just administratively about these assessments.
Wonderful. And I will leave you all with keep pushing. When it doesn't work, try something else. When that doesn't work, try something else. Never give up. Students need us. They need us. They depend on us. They depend on us to move forward and to continue to build their careers and to build what they're doing to be successful citizens in the world. And so we thank you for listening to us. We're excited for you to continue your assessment work, and we welcome continued thoughts and feedback as to how Course Hero can continue to improve on its work. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.